Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about how you can apply more than 100 years of manufacturing teachings to boost your pharmacy's efficiency. By taking a lean approach to your pharmacy operations, you can minimize waste, increase your efficiency, and consistently deliver a higher value experience to delight your customers. Before we jump right in, I want to briefly introduce myself. I'm Brian Cristobal. I'm the Consulting Services Manager here at Parata Systems. I'm an industrial engineer, and I've been working with pharmacies for about 6 years now. If you're not familiar with what industrial engineering is, it's a branch of engineering that really focuses on how people, processes, and economics work together. A common mantra is, industrial engineers don't make things, we make things better. And I hope I can start you down that path today. Before joining the Parata team, I worked in an electronics manufacturing plant. I was responsible for a variety of products, but the goal was always to standardize and quantify the processes and find ways to continuously improve. If we could introduce a small improvement but repeat it hundreds or thousands of times, that value gets multiplied. Parata brought me to the team because they recognize that pharmacies are very similar to manufacturing environments. We go through a series of repeatable steps with some minor tweaks here and there, but again, introducing just a little improvement can go a long way to increasing efficiency and safety. So let's look at an example of how lean manufacturing principles can be applied in the pharmacy environment. A few years ago, we were evaluating a pharmacy that looked very similar to what you see on the screen. The technicians had a filling counter, and behind them they had a few rows of stock shelves. The shelves were organized alphabetically, and we estimated that, on average, the technicians had to walk roughly 7.5 feet to the shelves. When we introduced automation, we were able to bring a majority of the orders right behind the filling station. Over half of the prescriptions were within arm's reach. For now, let's forget about any time savings of counting and labeling. Just from the distance that the technicians had to travel, we estimated about 5 feet of savings per trip. Of course, they had to get back to their workstation, so we actually saved about 10 feet per round trip. Between retrieving the stock bottles and also the return of the bottles, we estimated that we were saving about 200 trips per day. So that's about 2,000 feet per day. That's about 2.7 miles per week, and that's about 11.4 miles per month. Just by saving 5 feet, we saved this pharmacy 5.2 marathons of travel per year. And that's just an example of the type of work that I do. The principles of lean manufacturing have been around for as long as people have been trying to figure out how to do things better. But the formal, organized structure that process analysts like myself study, those really started to form in the early 1900s with Henry Ford. These ideas continue to evolve with contributions by the Japanese and also the Germans. Simplified, the goal is understood to be working to continuously meet customer requirements efficiently and effectively with little or no waste. Not always, but most times, this translates into focusing on maximizing the process velocity or speeding up the process. And because it doesn't do any good just to hope for these things to happen, it also includes a collection of tools for making process improvements happen. So there's a lot of approaches to process analysis. Take this overly simplified process, for example. A lot of people will look at this series of processes and prioritize the earliest processes because it feeds the others. Others will tell you to prioritize the later processes so that anything within the system gets out as soon as possible. But this diagram is tricky. While you can improve the individual processes, for example, find ways to do data entry faster, find ways to count faster, or find ways to check faster. While you can definitely introduce some process improvements within each of those, the greatest potential is actually not in the processes themselves, but what's happening in between the processes. The biggest opportunities are actually these in-between steps. What's happening after data entry, but before the order is actually filled? The answer is waste. At its core, in the simplest terms, lean is all about finding and minimizing these wastes. So what is waste? Like words like efficiency or optimization, waste can sometimes be a buzzword until you really get into some specifics. In lean, we categorize them and even try to make it easy for you to remember. The acronym downtime describes the 8 wastes: defects, overproduction, waiting, not utilizing talent, transportation, inventory, motion, and excess processing. I'll go into a little bit of detail on some of these, but before I do, I want to highlight something that I said earlier. A perfect process will have eliminated all waste, but that's not realistic. All processes will have some amount of waste in them. The only thing that we can do is try to minimize that waste. So defects are fairly easy to recognize. Anytime there's a mistake, everything done to create that mistake and all the steps required to fix that mistake, all those steps would be considered waste. Imagine the technician pulls alprazolam instead of lorazepam. Everything that happens between the time alprazolam was pulled until the mistake is caught, everything is waste. That includes all the walking, counting, labeling, handling, and so on. Then when that mistake is caught, there's additional steps to fix that mistake. So the return of the drug, possibly reprinting the label, walking to the shelf again, picking the correct drug. All these extra steps are more than doubling the work that followed that initial mistake. Overproduction is when you're doing work before it's needed. Now, this waste is more harmful in other environments, but it's still pretty hurtful to the pharmacy process. The most common example I see is the overproduction that happens due to an unbalanced line. If a pharmacist already has 30 prescriptions to verify, is a technician helping move the process any faster by adding a 31st? No. In fact, every additional script probably makes things harder by creating a bigger and bigger pile to organize and sort through. Overproduction also happens when we do things just in case. Are refills ever filled assuming that the patient will come and pick them up, but they never do? These are examples that probably happen in every pharmacy every day. And I'm not out of touch. I recognize why these things happen, but they're wastes. Like I've said before, we can't always eliminate all the waste, but we can try to minimize it. If nothing else, it's something to look at. Waiting is any idle time that causes workflow to stop. Waiting is easy to recognize if you're looking at people, but also pay attention to the product and any resources as well. Are labels sitting in a pile waiting for drugs to be picked from the shelf? Are vials sitting in a basket waiting to be checked? Is a machine waiting to be replenished? Anytime a resource should be working but isn't, or anytime the prescription is waiting for its turn to be worked on, those are all examples of wastes. Not utilizing talent. There used to be only 7 wastes. This 8th waste was added when we began to realize that people were not always being used to their full potential. Unfortunately, this is a very common waste in pharmacies. And being that I work with dispensing automation, it's what stands out to me the most. Your people are highly trained professionals. They've studied, they've practiced, and they've developed a valuable skill. Yet how much of their day is spent counting 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30? I can teach a monkey to count to 30, yet that's what we're asking our people to do all day long. They should be out there counseling patients, talking to physicians, building relationships. Pharmacies are fighting to be considered a valuable part of the healthcare team and break the stigma that pharmacies are just pill counters. How can we get there if we're allowing team members to waste their talent? Part of what makes you successful is that you've surrounded yourself with other good people and created a successful team. So make sure you're getting the most out of them. Transportation. So transportation is the movement of any work or material that doesn't add value. This one can be tricky because you can see movement, but does that movement add value? An easy way to tell is to ask if the customer is willing to pay for that movement. Is a patient willing to pay for the prescription to move from the pharmacy to their doorstep? In a lot of cases, yes. Is the patient willing to pay for the prescription to move from the back of your pharmacy to the front of your pharmacy? No. So why is it back there in the first place? Inventory. Inventory is a waste that pharmacies understand all too well. So who doesn't have an expensive drug sitting on the shelf right now that you know isn't going to be used? Who's sitting in their office right now with a box of supplies that hasn't been opened in a month? Who has safety stock because you're afraid the distributor won't send you what you need quickly enough? Inventory is cash. Idle excess inventory is wasted cash. Motion. While transportation refers to the movement of goods, motion refers to the movement of people and resources. So walking to the shelf, walking back to your workstation, walking to the phone, walking to the register, searching, carrying goods through the pharmacy. These are all wastes. And finally, excess processing. This is any unnecessary steps that don't add value for the customer and the customer's not willing to pay for it. So does anyone add a strip of tape around the label because the labels don't stick very well? Does anyone double count drugs that don't require double counting? Are you preparing paperwork that just gets thrown away? Do you ever have to do data entry into your pharmacy management system, then have to do data entry again for a packaging system? Look at what activities are happening in your pharmacy and ask yourself, do we really need to be doing that? So I've listed a lot of wastes, and I've given a couple of examples, and a lot of them you may not agree with. But sometimes asking the question, discussing the value, and challenging the way things are done, that's the first step towards process improvement. If you ever ask someone why something is being done, and their best response is, that's the way we've always done it, 9 times out of 10, you've probably found your opportunity. So like I mentioned earlier, industrial engineers focus on people, processes, and economics. Processes and economics are pretty easy. You can predict those, they don't fight back. The real tricky part is people. So how do you get your people on board? How do you create a culture of continuous improvement? How do you get buy-in? This is probably the most difficult thing that leaders have to deal with, and a landmine that ends too many process improvement efforts before they begin. You should approach it with a very objective eye. There's probably 3 types of processes in your pharmacy. There's the documented process, so what's written down, what's in the handbook, what's in the training. Then there's the process as the manager perceives it. How should it be done? How does leadership want things to be done? Then there's a third. There's the process as it actually happens. And I highlight this not to put blame on anybody, but to recognize that there is a difference. Unless your team is intentionally being spiteful, which I don't think they are, there's a reason why the actual process is different from the documented process or the manager's perception. Maybe the documentation makes sense in a textbook or in a classroom or by the board of pharmacy, but it doesn't make sense in the real world. Or maybe the staff is telling the manager what they're wanting to hear. 1 or 2 of these processes needs to change, and too many times we assume it's the actual process, when maybe the actual process is being done because there's something wrong with the other 2. The only way to find out is to involve the frontline team members. Every pharmacy that I work with, I tell them, I'm not the expert, I'm a facilitator. I can ask the right questions, but the real experts in the process and the people who know the problems and the solutions better than I ever will are the people who live it every day. To really have a chance at a quality process improvement project, you need to involve all levels of the team. Maybe not every pharmacist and not every tech and clerk, but each different level needs to be represented. That's the only way for the team to feel ownership and the best way to ensure buy-in. So I borrowed this graphic from the training by the Institute of Industrial Engineers. It basically spells out what's needed for a successful project. Leave out any one piece and you're setting yourself up for failure. So you need a vision, a mission, a purpose. Don't just go blindly into the night and hope for the best. You need a goal. You need to have an idea of where you want to end up. Without that, you'll end up with chaos and confusion. You need leadership. If the team is working and working, but they don't know if they have the support of leadership, should they just trust that they're making the right decisions? That's not always an easy thing for people, and it can cause fear and anxiety. As I alluded to on a previous slide, you can have all the best ideas in the world, but without the people, all you'll have is a very well thought out piece of paper and no change. You need process and resources. You need the tools and the time to focus on improving. You can't expect a team to fix a problem in their spare time with whatever tools they have lying around, because in today's world, there's just not a lot of that to spare. And then finally, you need a plan and a program. That's a whole other webinar on project management, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen teams start solving the problem before they even define what the problem is, or make a change before they understand what their starting point is. We've talked about defects being one of the 8 wastes. You don't want your process improvement to be a defect. So that's a lot of information, I know. The first step, and in my opinion, the most important step in the process improvement, is identifying the opportunity. Once you recognize one of the 8 wastes, you can start attacking it. But you'd be surprised at how often we lie to ourselves about how much waste exists in the process. After that, you don't need any formal tools. Most of the time, being open-minded and aware of the problem is enough to start solving the problem and minimizing the waste. But there are a lot of tools and a lot of resources to give you that extra help. I've listed a few of those tools, and there's a lot more to help you on your process improvement journey. And don't be intimidated if these don't make any sense to you. I've dedicated my entire professional career to studying this stuff, and I still need to pull out the textbooks and my notes to help me attack a project. If you do need help, there are experienced professionals to help you. Industrial engineers like myself, lean practitioners, Six Sigma belts. These are all professionals specifically trained to look at things differently and see the things that you don't. You'll be surprised. Sometimes all it takes is an outside perspective to open your eyes to some of the opportunities in the process. There are several consulting companies out there that will offer operations or process analysis. And of course, you can work with me. I've been specializing in pharmacy operations for several years now. And Parata is not just an automation provider. The Parata team takes pride in making sure that we do everything that we can to do what's best for the pharmacy. We want to be your partner. My approach, my perspective, everything I've talked about today, that's just another tool we want to bring to the pharmacies that we work with. I hope there was something in this video you feel you can take away and apply in your pharmacy. If you have any questions about this information or anything related that I didn't cover, please feel free to reach out to us. Send a note to success@parata.com and we'll be in touch with you to learn how we can help.